and today is a Theory Thursday. Particularly with Theory Thursdays, I like to go over the theory of entertainment, which is that there is no such thing as mere entertainment. Specifically, whenever you watch something or enjoy something and get that feeling inside you, it's actually your mind alerting you that there's something that you need to pay attention to. When you hear a joke and you laugh because it's funny, but the reason it's funny is because they're able to pack a dense amount of information and connect a bunch of different things within that joke instantly. And that laughing factor actually helps you to remember it. I mean, there's so many jokes that you remember because they're funny, but also in part because they're speaking about a very interesting truth, right? And with things that are engaging and entertaining, you have that where there's different truths that are being communicated through that piece of media, whatever it might be. And all the quote unquote special effects, entertainment, whatever you want to call it, is just different forms of engaging people. And what are you being engaged to do? Well, you're being engaged to learn. It's all about learning, essentially, right? And that's what it is. That's why we pull towards some of these stories and some of these shows and games and movies, is because we want to ultimately learn. There's a thirst that we have to learn, specifically internally as people. Just as much as we thirst for water or we hunger for food, we also thirst to learn in particular. So there's something interesting about that. And there's so many different facets and ways of learning that I think are very, very key. But in particular, one of the ways that have been, I feel, neglected has been the realm of entertainment, in that we've sort of cast it off aside as something that you do to waste your time, something that you do in your leisure, something that you do to basically, escape from the world, right? Rather than to discover the world, right? And there's uh, there's interesting things because once you look at certain forms of media that are big escapes, let's say, the interesting aspect of them is that you're not actually escaping the world more than you are actually uncovering or discovering it even more. Because what you end up having is realities within the world that you're escaping into that actually map into our current reality. So as you learn more things within that world or in that lore, you also are able to bring some of those things back into the real world. A great example, and before I get into today's topic, I just want to bring this up, is that there's a show that was really popular back in the day called Game of Thrones, right? It was like the theme song, you would just hear it and people would go nuts because it was a great theme song, right? A great intro song, but also the series was phenomenal in terms of being able to map out our own reality, but into this fictional fantasy medieval setting. And the reason why that show worked so well is because you would have consequences to the actions of the characters within that show. And those consequences reflected realistic consequences within our own reality. So we may not get burned by dragon fire, but there are certain things that we need to pay attention to in our own world that matter when you're dealing with, another world. And I say all that to say that whenever we're consuming our media or content, whatever it is, it's always important to keep that in mind, because if you're not looking for something, you won't catch it, right? But if you are looking for something, you can catch it. So whenever I'm playing something, watching something, or anything, I'm always thinking at it from the perspective of, hey, this is cool. What is it that I can sort of learn from what I just watched? Or why is it that that worked? Or what is it about this character that is so, intriguing or fascinating? So I like to ask myself these types of questions to be able to bring back with me as much as I can from the world I'm diving into. And with that said, today, what I want to talk about in particular in regards to this theory of entertainment is this aspect of what I like to call kind of like a hierarchy of entertainment. And what I mean by that is there's certain forms of media that will hit differently depending on the form of media itself. And depending on, or I should say, medium in this case, right? So, depending on the medium, will depend on how much information you can derive from that medium. And each of them have their own strengths, each of them have their own weaknesses. We've seen this specifically with adaptations, right? When you adapt something from a book into a movie, etc., there's certain things that you just cannot properly adapt when looking at the books versus the movies. But there's also certain things that you cannot learn as well without one tool or the other tool. And this is very important because I think we have in our society what I would like to call media snobbery. And what I mean by media snobbery, you probably got an idea of what I mean, is that we have certain peoples that, for whatever reason, when it comes to their media, they will look at certain forms of media as, like, art, let's say, high arts, prestige, whether it's opera, whether it's, I don't know, pick your art form, novels, whatever it is, right? And then they'll look at other forms of media, even within the same genre, and not look at that as art, which to me is wild. We actually had a period of, I don't know, 20 to 30 years potentially of video games not being considered art at all. Like, overall mainstream consensus is that they were not considered art for good, well over 30 years, I would say, within the gaming industry, probably more, where these were not considered an art form, whereas something like film was, or something like music is, right, and so on. So uh, it, it's a thing, right? Media snobbery. And what's interesting is that with the newer forms of media, they tend to fall victim to this the most in regards to this media snobbery. But we also kind of get the reverse of it as well, which is that some people might look at, newer forms of media as superior, and they might look at something like books, or even myth, right, as, superfluous, right, as ridiculous, as useless, right? So what I want to talk about today in particular is a hierarchy of this stuff within, my working theory here of entertainment, which is essentially that entertainment is a key form of learning, a key tool to learn, and that we need to use it as such. And what I want to look on here specifically is within that hierarchy, uh, from, let's say, the far left of the hierarchy. Is this left here? Yeah, I think this is left. You guys are seeing this left. Okay. So on the left hand side here of the hierarchy, what you essentially have is something like written word, right? So this can be a text, this can be a story, a myth, this can be a receipt, right? But written text is essentially what you have on this end of the hierarchy, right? And then as you go from written text, the next step up is spoken word. So speaking and spoken word is, I would say, the next step in this hierarchy of media. And in this case, spoken word is a media, right? Speeches, talking to people. Now, what's interesting about these two is they're probably the most fundamental forms of media that we have. What's interesting though is that the of these two, I would say this is a great example of what I mean by this hierarchy. In that, uh, the reason, even though writing is actually newer than speech, right? Speech is more ancient, is older, especially when you're looking at things like a divination. Like, the term medium is someone who is, anyways, I'm not going to get into that stuff now, but essentially, you have an older form or older medium in spoken word versus writing, which is a little bit newer. But the spoken word in this case is, I would say, higher on this hierarchy, simply because it's more engaging, and that's important. Engagement is important because it helps someone to be able to learn and to learn effectively. Now, the benefits of reading is that you're able to isolate on just the letters and just the words. And because of that, it requires you to focus more. And by being more focused into something, you're essentially able to, pay it, grasp more things, digest it slower. And when you're digesting media, slow digestion is key when it comes to extracting some of those nutrients. So, in a way, written word is nice because you're able to extract, I think, nutrients at an easier wavelength than you can from, let's say, something like spoken word. Because spoken word, what happens is when someone's speaking, you're listening to what they're saying, it's engaging, but you might forgot what they said 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, and in turn, it's a little harder to digest. So I'm highlighting these two here because as you sort of increase in engagement, right, and you increase in this hierarchy, you also decrease in terms of the digestion aspect of it, in terms of the able being able to take in what is said and to take it in effectively, right? As you sort of go along the right hand side of this medium, of this sort of media hierarchy, what you end up happening is that these same things that you're seeing applied to written word and spoken word expand as you start to evolve along this path. So I wanted to sort of zoom in a little bit more here between these two to sort of highlight some of these differences, so that when you're looking at this, uh, once I get to my top form of media, it's not a situation where I'm denigrating the other forms of media. All of them have their place, their purposes, and they're all good in different ways, right? But the reason why there's a hierarchy is because I do believe that there is a degree in which uh, there's just things you cannot do in those other ones. The other thing as well is when it comes to spoken word versus written word, spoken word requires a different level of skill and application than written word does. So written word, you just need one person, right? Or sometimes multiple writers, but just someone writing down the text, which is just one skill, which is as simple as you can get. Now, when it comes to spoken word, what you actually need there is, on one hand, yes, you can have someone who's writing a script, all that kind of stuff. But on the second hand, you actually need someone to go out there and speak publicly and to be able to orate the words that are there in a way in which is engaging for other people to listen to. You can't just have that listen to in a drab, slow, boring kind of way. You need someone who can actually go and speak those words effectively, clearly, and honestly, right? So that's what you get with the differences between those two mediums. So another difference that you get when it comes to this hierarchy of media, right, is as you move right along that hierarchy, you also require more skill and effort required to create something in these different forms of media. And these are all the different criteria I'm sort of discussing and using to explore why I have something like writing all the way at the beginning of the hierarchy. And then once we get to the end of the hierarchy, you'll sort of see those differences. But I want to really highlight the differences between these two because I think they're small enough and granular enough to where it kind of makes sense, right? Now, there is a YouTube video I had seen recently where they were looking at reading specifically versus audiobooks. And this is really interesting because uh, parts of the media snobbery that we get is that people who read books look at people who listen to books as though they're not real readers, as though they haven't actually read the book, they haven't put in the effort, and technically they didn't. They listened to it, right? But what some of the science shows is that in your mind, it's considered the same thing. It's considered equal. So I have, for example, a few daughters, and they'll listen to audiobooks for different books that they simply cannot read because there's no images in those books and there's only words in those books, right? So in that case, they'll still be able to listen to those books if they're interested in them, right? And what happens is they still take in the story as though they have read the book. So I don't have. Let me see if I can. I'm not going to queue up the video right now, just because I don't want any issues with the live stream and how that's working. We'll see towards the end of this once I finish my talk here if I can sort of incorporate that video. But basically, what the video talks about is they got a group of university students, and those university students were told to read a book versus have an audio version of the book, right? And then they were tested on different things in terms of reading comprehension, all that kind of stuff. And overall, what they ended up finding in terms of the brain chemistry is that in both cases, the ones that were listening to it, the book, and the ones that were reading the book were getting about the same level of reading comprehension. And this was across multiple studies, right? To the extent in which in your mind, there's almost no difference between doing one or doing the other. Now, there is a caveat in this, in that when it comes to doing things that are very, let's say, technical and scientific and specific, so things that are maybe harder to digest and really require a lot of, sorting through data, in those instances, the people who were using written word were able to test a little bit better when it comes to people that were using you know, audio, let's say, right? Now, for the purposes of the theory of entertainment, right, and just entertainment in general, uh, that doesn't apply as much as it does, for example, in more technical fields. I think for certain stories where the writers are very technical and do get into a lot of details and play with wording a lot, it is helpful when comes to looking at different clues that are found within the book, those types of things. I think those help. But overall, what you're looking at here is uh, you're getting the same level of information transfer or learning when you're listening to something as when you are reading something. It's about the same. Now, the difference is that you won't learn how to spell a word if you hear it in most cases, right? Uh, but you will learn how to pronounce the word. And vice versa. If you read a word, you'll know how to read it, but you may not necessarily know how to pronounce it, right? And this is key because one of the aspects of why this is important to me, right? Discussing this stuff is that one of the things we've lost is when we consume our media, we don't look at it as something that is useful in our day to day lives, that there isn't necessarily utility to it other than watching it, which is false. When you watch something, there's utility within the story or within the narrative that will apply to you in your day to day life. Uh, there's utility found simply in the mediums themselves that I'm highlighting here. So earlier I mentioned the spelling situation. There's utility in being able to spell something. Obviously, you can communicate it with others. It's actually really helpful, for example, in our current work environment, right? But the reason why something like spoken word is placed above something like written word is because in spoken word, you're learning how to pronounce the thing. On top of learning how to pronounce a thing, you're actually learning how to speak in general and how to carry your voice and speak to different people, right? You're able to grasp that from the actual speaker themselves. So depending on how good the speaker is will depend on how much you're learning, right? Now, what's cool about media and entertainment is that a lot of the speakers are trained actors. On top of that, they get some of the coldest lines that you'll ever hear, right? So when you're watching different characters on screen, you're not just, or sorry, not on screen, in audio, you're not just learning uh, how what the words are, how to pronounce them, but you're also learning how to interact and how to inflect your voice. So the reason why this is important is because I'm trying to really break this down again from the granular level of how each medium, right, is a tool for learning, but how one medium is superior in a lot of ways when it comes to that learning. And specifically, when you're looking at spoken word versus written word in terms of media formats, spoken word is actually more useful to people. So if I want to learn a new language, for example, right, it's nice to learn how to write the language. So reading content that will help me to learn how to write it is helpful. But you know what's even more helpful than that? Speaking the language. Because if you're in a country and you're in certain places, if you can speak it but you can't write it, you're way more useful than if you can write it and not speak when you're dealing with people. And people are the world's biggest resource, right? So back to the hierarchy here. Another reason why something like spoken word is above something like written word is because of the fact that you are able to utilize what's being learned more effectively at a higher level than just the other way around, right? But you still have this hierarchy of media in the sense that the same text that's written can also then be executed in spoken word or in an audio format, which you see all the time with audiobooks and such, right? But again, what in terms of what I'm referencing here, you get a much better experience listening to something than oftentimes reading it, depending on the person, obviously. Some people prefer reading because they've been trained that way. But overall, I'm just speaking overall here as well, is that oftentimes audio is more useful in being able to learn things from it, right? Uh, anyways, so I spent a lot of time with these two here. So written word and then spoken word, right? In terms of the two forms of media, uh, that to start things off on the left hand side of this hierarchy. As we move on up now, we're going to add elements to each of those forms. And as those elements are added, you start to have other forms. But before I add an element, I want to include the next form here, which is kind of like spoken word, but is different. And I would say this is music, right, or auditory. So music is quite interesting because what you have with music is a means of communication that goes beyond, wow, it goes beyond the regular forms of communication. I don't know. It's hard. Like there's a line that says, "Music doesn't need permission to get into your soul," and I love that phrase. Music doesn't need permission to get into your soul. The reason why I like it is because it showcases how a really good crafted musical piece will just flow right in and allow for that digestion to sort of kick in and pick up. And a speaker, for example, you can reject what a speaker is saying and it will not get into your soul in the same way. You can reject what someone is telling you and you won't take it in. But a song just flows right in, and as long as the song is good, it's in your head, it's flowing, right? But these three, so written, speaking, and then musical, right? These are kind of like your foundational building blocks of media in general, right? And almost every form of media that come after this, almost every form, not all of it, use these as a foundation. Another form of media as well, as we're moving along the hierarchy here, is visual media. Now, visual media is really, really huge, and this is not specifically just talking about, uh, you know, a movie or something like that. I'm talking about specifically the foundational building block of visual media, which is colors and color and painting and all those types of things, all the things that encompass visual media, right? This is kind of like uh, a building block of things when it comes to media itself. You have your written, you have your spoken, you have your audio, and then you have your visual. All these four elements together, right? What they do is they create all these different types of media that you sort of pick up and receive, right? And as you combine some of these together, you also then have a higher form of media that's created from combining those things. So the next form of media in particular I want to talk about after the visual media, and just briefly I'll mention I put visual media above something like spoken word because when you explain something to someone, right, they can have an idea of what it is and how to do it. If you show them how to do it, like physically move and show them, that is another way of them learning that is way more effective. Because as we know, a picture has 1,000 words. So being able to explain all 1,000 of those words can take forever and can be difficult. But being able to see it, to see the thing, allows you to very quickly and easily be able to digest it, right? It's more effective, essentially, the visual media. The problem, though, is once you introduce something like visual media, interpretation is more difficult and more varied, which for some people they think that's a problem, but I would argue it's a feature that's actually effective and helpful because with different forms of interpretation, not that you don't get interpretation when it comes to the other forms of media, but specifically with visual media really introduces a lot of interpretation as well, which can sometimes make it more difficult to communicate something, right? But as you move up here, you have your visual media, which is something that you're then able to see. And then the last form of media, or not last form, I should say, the last element of media, I'll say, right? The last element here is play or mechanics, right? So this is where you get something like games, right? In a game, you have a bunch of like something as simple as like playing tag. That's a game where you run, you're it, okay, oh, you're it. That's a simple game, right? But that's a game. The mechanics of play, excuse me, the last way or form of media in a way, right? Because through play, you're able to learn a lot of interesting things as well. And play is interesting because it incorporates your entire body and it requires you to utilize oftentimes your spoken word and it requires you to utilize oftentimes your visuals to be able to play such games, right? And sometimes it requires you to read as well. So these fundamental elements of media, right? So your writing, or your spoken word. Sorry, your writing, your spoken word, your visual media, and then your play, right? All these forms of media separately have their own hierarchy. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little deep with this, but with that, when you start to combine these forms of media, that has its own hierarchy as well, that goes higher up. So you sort of go left to right, but then you start to go higher up once you combine different forms of media together. So, for example, if I now combine something like written word with spoken word, you have something like an audio drama, right? Where you now have an audio drama going with a well scripted, well written thing with people who are coming in and acting upon that thing, right? And that is going to be more effective, let's say, or higher on the hierarchy than something like a speech would be, which is just using the the auditory aspect of things, right? And then someone's ability to speak. The reason why is because once you head into forms of, for lack of a better term, entertainment, you head into this realm of interpretation and ambiguity. And the reason why that's important as a feature is you can have the exact same scene interpreted 7 to 10 different ways, and a lot of those different ways can have validity, right, within their own way. And this interpretation is usually within a range of interpretation, right? And the reason why that's important is once you have something like that in place, you can learn a lot from a really well put together scene, because a lot of different people can watch the same scene and pick up something differently from it, which is the wonder of interpretation in that sense. So when you have something that's like a story or a auditory story, right, it allows for you to better take that in. Now, once you upgrade that story with audio and you add visuals to it, on one end, there's a trade-off, right? You remove some of the ambiguity because you're able to see what the characters look like versus imagine them. But what you do get, however, is you're able to add certain visual elements that communicate much quicker a thought or an idea than just through the spoken word on its own, right? And at that point, for example, you no longer need someone to write out the setting of something and how it looks or how it feels, because you can just see it and you can see how it looks and feels, right? So once you add the element of visuals, you now have something like a TV show or a cartoon or whatever, and that is a new medium, and that new medium is higher on this hierarchy. And again, because it's higher on the hierarchy, there's different things you can learn that you just cannot learn from the previous one. For example, if you were to just focus in on the imagery, so turn off all the sound, right? And just look at the imagery from scene to scene from a show or a TV show. A really well crafted show visually is able to do great storytelling with just the images alone, right? And that is an element of great storytelling. Now, if you were to flip it and you just turn off the images and only listen to the audio, a well crafted piece will also be able to tell a great story just from the audio. And if you were to just look at the script on its own, a well-crafted, story will have a great script that you can sort of read through. But when you also combine those together, you're able to digest those elements in a richer level, right? So it's really no comparison almost when you're looking at a multi-dimensional media versus a single or a two-dimensional form of media, right? So something that's multi-dimensional is something like a TV show or a movie, whereas something that's you know two-dimensional can be something like a book, as an example, right? There is definitely a huge difference there when it comes to it. Now, the key thing that we tend to overlook when it comes to this is that with books, because of how well they're digested, oftentimes, although you can reread them multiple times, they don't require that as a necessity to do. Whereas something like a film or movie, oftentimes to derive a lot of the key insight, you do need multiple viewings because there's just so much information being thrown at you all at once. A lot of stimulation, right? And because of that, oftentimes, like when I'll watch a movie, I'll get something the first time around, but then when I'll rewatch the same movie, there's a completely different theme that's resonating with me that's in the film. Where it's like, wait, I thought the film was about this. But now all of a sudden it's about something else, even though it's the same movie, right? And it's like a different showing will elicit or pull out different information even within the same film itself. And it's not that those other things didn't exist that you saw previously, it's just that there's more in there than what you had seen previously. And that's why multiple, consumption of media in general is helpful. So I'm not going to say like you should only rewatch movies or shows a bunch of times. You should definitely do this the case for other forms of media as well, like books and games and such, right? But as you sort of move up this hierarchy, repetition is required simply because there's so much packed into these different forms of media. And then uh, right now we've looked at all these forms of media being combined together, right? So we've looked at something like written word, auditory language, and we've also looked at what is it? Visual, right? So visual media. And now the fourth one we talked about earlier, which was play, right? Once you add the element of play in there with those other forms of media, what you end up getting is interactive uh, play in a sense, right? So that can be in the form of sports, board games, but also video games. And what you end up having here is you get to sort of this fourth dimension almost, where you're not just learning from seeing something, but you're actually learning from practicing to an extent, right? And that's where it gets really, really interesting because woven within gameplay mechanics are lessons that can be learned and taught, which is wild when you think about it. But it's very much there. And because of how unique game elements are, these are very difficult to derive. Very, very difficult to derive. And what I mean by that is games in particular are so hard to figure out because you have to play the game multiple times over and over and over again. Watch other people play it multiple times. But as that happens, and as you start to understand that and figure it out, there are certain principles that are found within those games, right? That are very tried and true principles. Those principles are what you then take with you into your life, into other areas. And you can do that as well for those other forms of media. It's just that with a movie, a book, TV show, one sitting, you can pretty much download a good amount of information and a good amount of data, right? From just that one interaction, right? But from something like a game, it might require 1,000 playthroughs of matches before you actually understand some of the principles at a deep level. I'm not talking about like being able to play the game. No, no, no. I'm talking about when you get so good at a game, you're playing it competitively and you're playing with other people who are also playing it competitively, who are also learning it at a deep level. Once you get to that level of understanding of a game, the principles start to ooze out of the game, right? Just completely ooze out of it. A great example I can give right now is there is. I bring this game up often because I really had fun with it. Legends of Runeterra, right? It's a card game battler, and with these card games, they're based off of Magic the Gathering. Often, a lot of them, and in that game, what you have is you have a system where every turn you have what's called mana, or let's just say it's like magic points or whatever, right? And round one, everyone gets one magic point. Round two, everyone gets two. Round three, everyone gets three. So as time progresses, your magic points, let's say, increase, right? And the idea here is you're supposed to use those points to have an effective battle system, right? Now, what's interesting about Legends of Runeterra is they had the system in there where you could choose to not use your points and save them for the next round. You can save up to three of these points for the following round. So this created an interesting mechanic where oftentimes the best strategy is not to use up everything you have all at once, but instead to strategically plan as to when you are going to use your points in which specific sequences, right? And those who got really good at this type of play were able to do certain combos and certain moves that otherwise wouldn't be possible, right? Now, what's interesting about that mechanic, right, is that translate directly into real life. For example, this idea of spending your money, all of your money, as soon as you receive it, makes sense for a lot of people. For other people, it doesn't. But that mechanic of saving up your resources to then use your resources at a particular point in time in which it's giving you the maximum lift from using those resources is key within the match, to the extent in which you can lose a match if you miss time when you're going to use up your magic points or whatever it is I was calling them, right? Mana in this case is what the game calls it. I think it's called mana in that game. Anyways, you get what I'm saying, right? Some games will promote this aspect of you just use up whatever you can, but when they added in that element of saving your mana points, what it did is it made the game more fun. That's number one, right? But number two is it mapped the game closer to reality, in the sense that you have that element of reality where every time you receive a paycheck, yeah, you can spend it all up, right? Which is what a new round sort of could represent, is receiving a new paycheck. But what you can do is you can save a portion of that for future rounds, right? To make larger purchases or bigger deals. And that small mechanic of understanding that in order to win in life, you need to be able to make the right plays at the right time. That's a key principle that you're learning from the game that you can then translate into your own life. And as you play hundreds and thousands of matches, you start to see different scenarios, in which case it makes sense to use up all of your magic points, and in which case it makes sense to not use them all up and to save them. And as you learn the ins and outs of those things, they start to really become second nature to you. And then once they're second nature to you, at that point, when you see them in nature, in reality, they're easily mappable to your situation. And what's interesting is that the pattern in which you were practicing within the game is also the pattern in which you then need to practice in real life. The pattern in which you were discovering within the film is the same pattern in which you need to then execute in real life. Or in this case, if it was a negative pattern, so something that you should not do and should not replicate, you can also represent that as well in real life. And this is really interesting because one thing that gaming does, and we're at the end of the hierarchy, in case you haven't explained, gaming is I would say at the top of the media hierarchy, right? And the reason why it's there is because there's certain things you can only learn from doing. There's certain things you only learn from practice. Whereas with gaming, you're not just watching, you're not just listening, you're also practicing. And in that practice, you're able to learn those different things that you otherwise wouldn't have learned from those other areas. A great example is when you look at something like the principle of, what's the principle called? I think it's pride, right? Uh, Pride is something where it's a very dangerous thing and you have to be careful and watch out for it, right? And one of the things that you'll find in story or in narrative is that they'll teach a story about how the villain will become prideful, and it's that villain's pride that causes them to lose, right? So you see this all the time in story, all the time in many different stories, is pride coming before the fall, right? That is a quote from written word that you then see executed within story, right? But this aspect of pride coming before a fall and how that is an issue that people face. It's one thing to read about it. So if you just read the text, pride comes before the fall, yeah, that's deep. That's nice, right? But then when you watch someone on their journey toward becoming more and more prideful, right? And you see that person, the look on their face when that pride is sort of bubbling up, when you start to see the actions that they're doing that relate to their pride, when all those things are coming up, when you see the inflections in their voice, when they're being proudful and boastful, right? When you see all of those things come together, you're like, oh, that's what it looks like, because you see that character fall at the end of the story, and it helps you to at least know in your mind, whoa, I'm starting to sound a little bit like Killmonger, right? Or I'm starting to sound a little bit like, you know what I'm saying? You have this thing where all of a sudden you are becoming that character that used to get taken down. And once you see that, you're like, okay, I need to chill a little bit before I fall, right? Which is how you learn. It's a key lesson too, because these are types of lessons that are life changing, to be honest, right? Now, what's interesting here, this part's really, really fascinating, is that when you look at something like gaming, you still have all the elements I just talked about in terms of the pride part. But what's interesting about a game is that you're actually able to experience the feeling, right, of that pride. So there's sometimes I'll talk about the same game again, Legend of Runeterra. There's times where I'm playing against another player and you're winning the match. You're actually winning thoroughly. It's like, oh, this is easy peasy piece of cake, right? So because of that, you'll start to do things that otherwise you wouldn't have done because you just want to show off or you just want to embarrass the opponent, whatever the case might be, right? And in many games, especially player versus player games, what you have is called a comeback mechanic. And comeback mechanics, what those things do is they allow the other user to be able to come back quickly into the match, whatever that may be. Now, what those also do, though, is they teach those players that are prideful to humble themselves. Because there's been, I don't know how many matches now where I'm killing it, right? I'm having a good match. And the next thing you know, because I didn't take the opponent seriously in whatever way, they're able to come back and defeat me, right? And you're now the villain in your own story, essentially, right? You actually get to experience that moment of pride and losing because of your pride. And when that happens, it humbles you. So that when you're in your day to day life now and things are going great, everything seems awesome, guess what happens? That feeling that you associated in the game shows up in real life. And once you recognize that, you have to be like, okay, hold on, whoa, let me take it easy here. Let me pause and bring things back, right? And those things, those sort of recognitions can only happen when, I won't say only happen, but oftentimes I've experienced it myself and seen it whenever I've played a game extensively enough and deeply enough to where the principles are sort of woven into you and you understand how they work. And I would say that with film, with books, all those different forms of media, repeated exposure to them allows for these things to sink in deeply and to be used later on in your day-to-day lives. But ultimately, again, this hierarchy here of media, the way that it works is what I've been mentioning throughout this episode here, which is that as you go from one end of the spectrum to the other, you get a lot more complicated, a lot more complex, and ultimately it requires a lot more for you to actually take in that info. And then when you go on the far other side of things, it's a lot simpler. It's just reading something, and you're usually able to take in these principles, I think, easier, right? But this idea, what usually happens with media snobbery, at least from what I've seen, is people that prefer, I don't want to call it fast food in a sense, so, but quick nutritional hits from their media uh, tend to lean more towards, something that is more tactile, because you're able to sit down for 5 minutes, read the thing, boom, get some insight, keep going, read for an hour, get some insight, keep going. But when you're looking at something like a video game that takes way more time, you might be 40 hours into the game before you're actually receiving a lot of the key aspects of that, right? And at that point, it might seem like a time sink or a waste of time, but ultimately, the principles that you receive are actually received at a deeper level than they would be in those other forms of media. And that's again speaking to something like something that's written, right? You can read that quote of pride coming before a fall and realizing, okay, yeah, that's pretty bad, right? That's something that you'll realize. But experiencing that pride and then falling because of it in a safe environment like a video game is a completely different experience. And it might not happen until you're 30 hours into that game, until you've actually become good at that game, right? And built pride up because you become good at that game, right? So in the same way that you can become good at something in real life and build up pride for becoming good at that thing in real life. Again, it correlates itself very, very well. But the point I'm making here today, and I think I'm going to end this here, is specifically you have your hierarchy of entertainment, and in that hierarchy, you have your lower forms of media. I don't want to say lower as in bad. I just mean lower as in less dimensions to it, right? So your writing, you have your spoken word, you have your visual media, and then you have your auditory media. And then once you add dimensions to your media, you start to get things like animated movies, films, TV shows, plays, like plays out in public, those types of things. And then once you add in the dimension of interaction and interactivity, then you get that next form of media, which is when you're dealing with something like video games, or in particular, to an extent, sports as well. uh, that's when you head into those realms. And once you head into those realms specifically, then you're dealing with higher forms of media, in the sense that you're able to learn principles at a more integrated level than you would be otherwise. With that said, wow, that's a lot. I was just mouthing off, going off for the last 45 minutes here, but it is Theory Thursday, and I wanted to dive into this aspect of the theory of entertainment. This is just what I've been able to observe, but I think that there's something there. And hey, if you feel like there's something there as well, leave something in the comments in terms of what you've been able to learn from observing these things. I still have some time here, about 15 minutes. So I'm going to pop open a game and do some streaming here and stream some of that game. But with that said, thank you guys for joining me here for this Theory Thursday and learning more about the theory of entertainment. And now I'm going to practice some of it by learning from one of the games I'm playing right now. Specifically, I'm playing Marvel. So I'm going to go ahead here and launch my stream and share my screen as I play through here. And one thing I'm doing my currently through is I'm looking to get as good as possible with these characters, and to get into like a flow state with some of these characters. And I'm trying to also figure out who my mains are for the game and who I want to focus in on in that sense. So right now I'm playing through a couple of them. I think Cyclops is definitely one of my dudes. Okay. There's performance issues, which this whole week I've been having some performance issues. Pause. Okay. So specifically when it comes to Marvel Cosmic Invasion, and I don't know if it's my internet connection or whatever it is, this whole week when I've been streaming, it's giving me problems. So if I do see some of those problems now, I'll have to stop the stream. And so far, yeah, it's happening. Yeah. So I'm moving, and nothing is moving here. Okay. That sucks. All right, so I do not get to invade, or actually, I'm not invading. I'm defending against an invasion. So I do not get to defend against this cosmic invasion during this stream, unfortunately. I'm gonna see if I can maybe later today. I'm thinking this is like a traffic issue where a lot of people in the area maybe are using the same bandwidth and it's slowing things down. I don't know. Speed test results are not making any sense. But anyways, I can't get into the game for today. This has been our Theory Thursday, though, in terms of the topics I wanted to cover. I'll do some house. Is it house cleaning? Yeah, I think that's the term, house cleaning. So I'll do some house cleaning now while I still have you guys on the stream here, in terms of what's going to happen going forward here. So as you guys know, I am doing my 100 days of streaming. So in these 100 days, I'm going to be streaming for 100 days, and then from that, I'm going to pivot and transition in another way later on. But I want to start with these initial 100 days of streaming so I can get pretty solid and good at streaming, right? And this is, I think, day 14, 15. I don't know at this point. I have to go through all my streams and tally them, right? But what I'm going to do going forward now, I'm transitioning into this next week, is I added in a time. So around noon each day, most days, is when I'll be doing my stream. There are some exceptions where I'll be dealing with a client specifically with, my other jobs that I work. And because of that, I may not then be able to stream right away. So I'll be doing a later stream like I am doing today, which is around 2 p.m. Eastern time today. 1:30 Eastern time is when we started. So I will be doing more of that. Now, what I'm going to be adjusting with these streams in particular is that each day now I'm going to have a focus for that day. So for example, today Theory Thursday was the focus, where I focused specifically on the theory of entertainment and different elements and aspects of it, right? That I can sort of speak on, like when I spoke on today, in regards to this sort of hierarchy of mediums, right? Another day I might just focus specifically on, the anatomy of a form of media, right? And how we can learn from that. But I won't get too deeply into that now. But Theory Thursdays is what this day is all about. So if you guys are actually into this theory of mine and think there's some legitimacy to it, and want to learn more about it and get geeky with it, this is those days. Now, on Mondays, right? I'm going to be transitioning into a movie Monday. Now, what movie Monday is, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to be talking specifically about movies, movies that are coming to mind on my end that I'm watching, but also that are specific to the focus of this channel, right? Which I do like to talk about the theory as well, but specifically we're focusing on for this season superhero media and content in general, which is why I'm playing Marvel Cosmic Invasion, because I'm focusing on superhero stuff. It's also why the movies I'm going to be watching and talking about are going to be superhero movies. In the future, we'll transition into other stuff too. But I want to start with the bread and butter, in a sense, the stuff that gets me excited, right? So that's why I'm going to start with the superhero stuff. And Movie Monday, what it's going to be is I'm going to be focusing on all movie-related stuff when it comes to reviews for movies that I may have been watching, when it comes to movie news that I may be interested in or want to bring up. All those types of topics will come in on Movie Mondays, all right? And I'll be diving into those types of things. Now, on Tuesdays, what's going to happen on Tuesday is TV Tuesday. So TV Tuesday is a similar idea where instead of movies, I'm going to be focusing on TV shows. And TV shows will come in every Tuesday. And whatever TV show I might be watching at the time, I'm going to talk about it. Whatever I'm learning from a show at the time, I might talk about it as well. And specifically on TV Tuesdays, I'm also going to get into potentially some spoilers, let's say, when it comes to certain shows that I might be watching and all that kind of business. So that's what TV Tuesday is about in terms of the topics. And as I go from week to week, I'll bring some subcategories in there as well. But I want to focus for each of the days on a particular topic. And these are going to be all my lunchtime streams. So anywhere between noon and say 3 o'clock is when I'll be streaming, depending on, again, what clients I might be dealing with on that day. So that's what we're looking at there when it comes to my lunchtime stream. And then Wednesday is going to be Wisdom Wednesday. Now, I talked earlier about how in this talk, the thing that we reach out to this media for is not necessarily the entertainment itself, but it's the learning. There's something about it that we're learning every time we're diving into the experience, and we're learning it at such a deep level that we don't even realize that we're learning it. So much so that certain forms of media that are easier to, let's say, consume, right? Those things seem as though you're not learning anything because of how easy they are to take in. But the reality is you're actually learning more from them than, let's say, when you're reading, a textbook that's just giving you direct facts, because you're understanding the elements at a deeper, more contextual level than you would be just reading facts from a textbook. A great example is history. If you're reading a history textbook versus watching a show based in history, you're learning way more from the show than you are from the textbook in a lot of cases, depending on the accuracy, obviously, of the show when you're looking at facts, right? But you're also learning way more when it comes to principles, life principles, when it comes to interactions with people, when it comes to speaking and communication, when it comes to so many different things, body language. All those things are learned from the history show versus from the, what's that, the history book. It's just vastly different, right? So what I do on Wisdom Wednesdays is I actually go and talk about some of the stuff that either I've played in the past, watched in the past, read in the past, right? That I've experienced at a deep enough level to where I've actually been able to learn that and try to, implement it in some of my life, and sort of what results that's led to potentially, and what lessons I've learned from practicing it. Because I think there's something key where it's like, if you learn something and then someone else does the thing and then it works, you want to know what that thing is, right? To see if it will work for you. Now, obviously, it's different for everyone in that you have your, as some people like to say, survivorship bias, where everyone has different results, right? But ultimately, you don't know if something's going to work until you try it. You don't know if it's legitimate until you've actually tried and done it yourself, right? And hearing from someone else from their perspective of what they've done in their lives, I think is helpful. So I can at least bring my own perspective on Wisdom Wednesdays. And as I get more subscribers and viewers and all of that, you guys can share some of your perspectives as well as to what you guys may have learned. I can even give your own stories. For example, if we're talking about Pride coming before the fall, right? And we're looking at something like a show or a movie where you saw that or experienced that, and then being able to relate that principle now to something that happened in your own life that you were able to catch, right, or realize was an issue because of the fact that you were playing that game or watching that show or reading that book or involved in that sport, right? One of those types of connections I think are really important and key. And Wisdom Wednesdays to me are all about that, and that's what I plan on talking about on those days, is trying to make as many of those connections as possible in those talks, and sort of going over that, right? And then Thursday we talked about it's Theory Thursday, and lastly on Friday, I think for me, one of the things I value a lot is family. So for Friday, I think Family Fridays, it makes sense in that I will be speaking specifically about how some of these principles or some of these things that I have found relate to the elements of family itself. Because I think it's a really key and interesting topic in regards to, yeah, just how these things affect one's family. And yeah, I do want to speak on that a little bit as well. So I think when it comes to Family Fridays, that will be my focus in the short term. Later on, I'm thinking of transitioning Fridays maybe to something like Fandom Fridays, where I'm looking at different reactions and stuff and different people throughout the fandom and reacting to that. And then move sort of the Family Friday to a segment of Wisdom Wednesdays. But for now, what I do want to dive into is, yeah, for the first couple weeks, I'm going to focus in on that, and we'll see where it goes. Right, this is flexible, this is fluid. We can do something different each day. It will vary, right? But for now, I think this is probably the best way to go at it. And yeah, we're going to keep going to hit that 100 days, and then from there, I'll see sort of what I can pivot into, see what works, what doesn't work, and then transition to a different phase of the channel. But for now, I'm enjoying doing these daily streams with you guys and being able to record and share a bunch of different things I've been able to learn. So I appreciate everyone who is still here and who's been able to listen. To those who've made it this far, you are a real one. Thank you. I appreciate you. With that said, I'm going to be signing off for this one. Remember, guys, there's no such thing as entertainment. This has been Theory of Entertainment. I'm your host, Lex, and I'll see you guys in the next.